This is the untold story of Saratoga. In the autumn of 1777, a turning point in the American Revolutionary War unfolded in the dense forests and rolling hills of upstate New York. The British Empire, confident in its military might, sought to crush the rebellion once and for all. But the American forces, though outnumbered and undersupplied, were determined to fight for their independence. This is the story of how General John Burgoyne's grand campaign met its fate at the Battle of Saratoga, a victory that would change the course of history. The British strategy, divide and conquer. By 1777, the American Revolution had entered its second year. The British High Command, led by Lord George Germain, devised a bold strategy to split the rebellious colonies in two. The plan was simple but ambitious. 1. General John Burgoyne would march south from Canada with a powerful army, capturing Fort Ticonderoga before pushing toward Albany. 2nd Lieutenant Colonel Barry St. Leger would move east through the Mohawk Valley, weakening American resistance. 3rd, General William Howe, based in New York City, would march north up the Hudson River to meet Burgoyne, effectively isolating New England, the heart of the rebellion. If successful, this three-pronged attack would strangle the revolution before France or other European powers could intervene. Burgoyne's confidence and early success. General John Burgoyne, nicknamed Gentleman Johnny for his flamboyant personality, was a seasoned British officer with experience in Europe. He believed his well-trained army, comprising British regulars, Hessian mercenaries, and loyalist volunteers, would easily crush the ragtag American forces. In June 1777, Burgoyne's campaign began with a stunning victory. His forces captured Fort Ticonderoga, a key defensive position, without much resistance. The fall of this fort sent shockwaves through the colonies. Many feared the British would now sweep through New York unchecked. But Burgoyne's early success masked growing problems. His army was slowed by heavy artillery and a long supply line. The dense wilderness and rough terrain made movement difficult. American militia constantly harassed his troops, cutting off supply routes. The American response: a growing resistance. While Burgoyne advanced, the Americans scrambled to organize a defense. General Philip Schuyler, initially in charge of the Northern Department, employed a strategy of delay, burning bridges, blocking roads, and harassing Burgoyne's forces to buy time. But as Burgoyne closed in, the Continental Congress made a crucial decision. They replaced Schuyler with General Horatio Gates, a more popular leader among the militia. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold, not yet a traitor, and Daniel Morgan's riflemen bolstered the American ranks. Most importantly, thousands of militia fighters, ordinary farmers and tradesmen flocked to the cause. They knew the land, used guerrilla tactics, and were fighting for their homes. Burgoyne, used to European warfare, underestimated their resolve. The first clash. Freeman's Farm. By September, Burgoyne's army was running low on supplies. His hope that Howe would reinforce him from New York was dashed. Howe had instead sailed south to attack Philadelphia, leaving Burgoyne isolated. On September 19, 1777, the two armies finally met at Freeman's Farm. Burgoyne launched attacks against the American positions, but Morgan's sharpshooters and Arnold's aggressive leadership inflicted heavy casualties. Though the British held the field by day's end, they suffered irreplaceable losses. The Battle of Freeman's Farm was a brutal wake-up call for Burgoyne. His army was bloodied, supplies were dwindling, and no help was coming. Meanwhile, the Americans grew stronger by the day. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation, one that would determine the fate of a nation. Burgoyne's grand plan was unraveling. His early confidence had given way to grim reality. The American forces would not break easily. In the next part, we will see how the British situation worsened, leading to the fateful Battle of Bemis Heights and the ultimate surrender at Saratoga. September 1777, the once confident British army, deep in the wilderness of upstate New York, now faced a grim reality. General Burgoyne's forces were exhausted, hungry, and surrounded by a growing American resistance. The first major clash at Freeman's Farm had left the British bloodied, but the fight was far from over. This is the story of how American determination began to turn the tide at Saratoga. Burgoyne's dilemma: no retreat, no reinforcements. After the brutal engagement at Freeman's Farm, Burgoyne found himself in a precarious position. Casualties mounted. Nearly 600 British and Hessian soldiers were killed or wounded. Supplies dwindled. Food, ammunition, and morale were running dangerously low. No sign of help. General Howe remained in Pennsylvania, and St. Legier's advance had been stopped at Fort Stanwix. Burgoyne had two choices: retreat to Canada or push forward to Albany. Pride and military honor compelled him to press on, hoping one more decisive victory would break the Americans. The American army gained strength. While Burgoyne struggled, the American forces grew stronger under General Horatio Gates. Key leaders emerged: Benedict Arnold, a bold and aggressive commander, respected by the troops; Daniel Morgan, his elite riflemen picked off British officers with deadly precision; Ebenezer learned NDU, Enoch Poor. Their brigades reinforced Gates's defensive lines. Most importantly, local militia swelled the ranks. Farmers, tradesmen, and frontiersmen, many with rifles and hunting experience, joined the fight. Unlike Burgoyne's professional soldiers, these men were fighting for their homes and futures. October 7, 1777, the Battle of Bemis Heights. With Burgoyne desperate for a breakthrough, he gambled on a reconnaissance in force, a probing attack to test American defenses. But the Americans were ready. The British advance meets fierce resistance. Burgoyne sent 1,500 men, under General Simon Fraser and Baron Riedesel, toward the American left flank. But Benedict Arnold, defying Gates's cautious orders, rallied the troops for a counterattack. Morgan's riflemen targeted British officers, including General Fraser, whose death demoralized his men. Arnold led a furious charge, riding across the battlefield like a man possessed, inspiring his soldiers. The British lines, collapsed under the assault, retreating in chaos to their fortified positions. Arnold's legendary moment. Though Gates had removed Arnold from command after a bitter argument, Arnold ignored orders and rode straight into battle, leading a critical assault on the Hessian-held Bremen redoubt. He was wounded in the leg, but his actions secured a decisive American victory. As smoke and gunfire filled the air, Benedict Arnold, the man who would later betray his country, became, for one moment, the hero of Saratoga. His fearless charge shattered Burgoyne's last hope of victory. The British retreat and siege. By nightfall, Burgoyne's army was in full retreat. Falling back to Saratoga, present-day Schuylerville, the Americans, now sensing total victory, pursued and surrounded the British. Burgoyne's men dug in, but where food and ammunition were nearly gone. American artillery bombarded their positions. Escape routes were cut off. No hope of rescue remained. The beginning of the end. On October 12th, Burgoyne called a council of war. His officers agreed. Surrender was inevitable. Negotiations began, and after days of tense discussions, the British commander faced reality. His grand campaign had failed. Burgoyne, who had once boasted of crushing the rebellion, now stood on the brink of humiliation. The Americans, once seen as a disorganized rabble, had proven themselves a formidable army. The world was watching, and the revolution would never be the same. The battles of Freeman's Farm and Bemis Heights had broken Burgoyne's army. Now, trapped and starving, the British faced an unthinkable surrender. In Part 3, we will witness the dramatic climax, the mass surrender at Saratoga, a moment that would shake empires and change history forever. October 1777. The once proud British army, now starving and surrounded, faced an unthinkable fate. General John Burgoyne, the man who had vowed to crush the rebellion, stood on the verge of surrender. The American forces, once dismissed as a disorganized rabble, had achieved the impossible. This is the story of the final hours at Saratoga, a moment that would echo across continents and change the course of the Revolutionary War. Trapped, the noose tightens. After the disastrous Battle of Bemis Heights, Burgoyne's battered forces retreated north, hoping to reach Fort Ticonderoga, but the Americans, led by General Horatio Gates, moved faster. Militia swarmed the countryside, cutting off escape routes. Continental Army troops fortified key positions, blocking any British advance. Supplies ran out. Soldiers slaughtered horses for food, and ammunition was nearly gone. By October 13th, Burgoyne's army was completely encircled and set near Saratoga, modern-day Schuylerville, New York. His officers urged him to surrender before the men starved or were massacred in a final assault. Negotiations, pride, and pragmatism. Burgoyne, still clinging to dignity, demanded honorable terms. He refused to call it a surrender, insisting on a big convention. a negotiated withdrawal. Gates, aware that a generous offer might prevent a bloody last stand, agreed to astonishingly lenient terms. 1. The British would march out with honors, their flags furled but not surrendered. 2. Officers kept their sidearms, and soldiers were promised passage back to England. 3. They would never fight in America again, a condition later violated by the British. It was a moment of stunning irony. The mighty British Empire, humbled by farmers and volunteers, now begged for mercy, and Gates, the cautious commander, gave it to them. The surrender ceremony, a scene of stunned silence. On October 17, 1777, the British and Hessian troops marched out of their camp to lay down their arms. Eyewitnesses described an eerie quiet. American soldiers stood in disciplined ranks, many in tattered hunting shirts, their faces hardened by battle. British regulars, in faded red coats, kept their eyes forward, some openly weeping. Burgoyne, in full dress uniform, presented his sword to Gates, who, in a gesture of respect, refused to take it. One American officer wrote, "Not a shout, not a word was heard. The silence was more powerful than any celebration." Why Saratoga changed everything. The surrender sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. 1. France enters the war. News of the victory convinced King Louis XVI to formally ally with America. February 1778, French money, ships, and troops would prove decisive. 2. A global war begins. Spain and the Netherlands soon joined against Britain, stretching its resources thin. 3. Morale soared in America. Doubters now believed independence was possible. Even George Washington, struggling elsewhere, called Saratoga the grand blow that may lead to final success. Burgoyne's fate, from scapegoat to satire. Returning to England in disgrace, Burgoyne faced ridicule. Parliament accused him of incompetence. Cartoons depicted him surrendering to farmers with pitchforks. He never commanded troops again, turning instead to playwriting and gambling. Yet in private, he admitted, "The Americans were far better soldiers than I ever imagined." The surrender at Saratoga was more than a military defeat. It was the moment the world realized America could win. But the war was far from over. In Part 4, we'll explore the immediate aftermath. How the victory fueled dissent in Britain, how the Continental Army struggled to capitalize on success, and why Benedict Arnold's betrayal loomed on the horizon. October 1777. The British Empire had been humiliated. An entire army surrendered, not to a European power, but to rebellious colonists. As news of Saratoga spread, kings, generals, and ordinary citizens scrambled to understand what it meant. This is the story of the explosive aftermath, how victory divided the British, emboldened the Americans, and set the stage for an even greater conflict. 1. London's fury, the political fallout. When word reached Britain in December 1777, Parliament erupted. The opposition whipped out Burgoyne's own boastful letters, mocking his pre-campaign prediction, "I will return victorious or not at all." Key reactions. King George III stubbornly vowed to fight on, authorizing new taxes and recruits. Prime Minister Lord North, fearing France's entry, secretly sent peace feelers, which Congress rejected. The press skewered Burgoyne. One cartoon showed him surrendering to a raccoon-riding militiaman. Britain's leadership was at war with itself, but across the channel, an old enemy saw opportunity. 2. France joins the fight, February 1778. Ben Franklin, America's envoy in Paris, had been lobbying France for years. Saratoga was his proof that the rebels could win. The Treaty of Alliance. France recognized U.S. independence, sent money, arms, and eventually troops, jocked naval support, forced Britain to divert forces globally. Irony alert, France's aid came with strings. They expected to reclaim lost colonies after the war. 3. Benedict Arnold, the hero who would betray. While Saratoga made Arnold a legend, it also planted the seeds of his treason. The breaking point, Gates took full credit in reports, downplaying Arnold's crucial role. Arnold's leg wound left him in agony, fueling bitterness. Passed over for promotion, he grew convinced the revolution favored politicians over warriors. The man who charged the Bremen Redoubt for freedom would, within 3 years, sell his country for gold and a British uniform. 4th, Washington's challenge, turning victory into momentum. Paradoxically, Saratoga's success deepened divisions in the Continental Army. Gates's supporters whispered he should replace Washington. Winter at Valley Forge, 1777-78, saw starvation and desertion. Proof America still lacked supplies. French aid was slow to arrive, leaving troops desperate, yet Washington used the victory to restore morale. Writing, Saratoga shows what free men can achieve. We must endure. 5. Burgoyne's bizarre return. Allowed to sail home in 1778, Burgoyne faced a shocking insult. Parliament denied him a court-martial and to clear his name. His own wife died of illness while he was stranded in America. He reinvented himself as a book playwright, satirizing the war he'd lost. His final verdict? The Americans fought not for a king, but for a cause. That made all the difference. Saratoga's ripple effects reshaped the war. France armed the rebels, Britain splintered, and America's leaders faced new tests of unity. But as war, Part 5, will reveal, the next phase brought war, greater bloodshed, betrayal, and the war's ultimate turning point. 1778, the echoes of Saratoga reverberated across battlefields and royal courts. France had joined the war, Britain scrambled to adapt, and the American Revolution entered a brutal new phase. But victory at Saratoga did not bring instant triumph. It unleashed a cascade of consequences that would ultimately lead to the world's first colonial empire's collapse. This is the story of how one battle changed everything. 1. Britain's desperate shift, the Southern strategy. With the North now too dangerous, British strategists pivoted south, believing Loyalist support would crush the rebellion. Key events: 1778 to 1780, Savannah and Charleston fell to the British. Brutal guerrilla war, patriots like Francis Marion, Swamp Fox, bled Cornwallis's army. Critical mistake: Cornwallis marched into Virginia, overextending his supply lines. Just as Burgoyne had been lured into the wilderness, Cornwallis now repeated history, with even deadlier results. 2. Benedict Arnold's betrayal, 1780. Embittered by slights and debts, the hero of Saratoga made his fateful choice: the treason. Secretly negotiated with British Major John Andre. Plot to surrender. West Point, key Hudson River fort, for £20,000. Andre captured with incriminating papers. Arnold fled to British lines. Legacy: his name became synonymous with treachery, but his defection failed to break American morale. 3. France's decisive role, the road to Yorktown. French intervention turned the tide. 1780, 6,000 French troops under Rochambeau arrived. 1781, French Admiral de Grasse blockaded Chesapeake Bay. October 1781, trapped by Franco-American forces, Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. Irony: the same strategy that doomed Burgoyne, isolation and encirclement, now destroyed Cornwallis. 4. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, Saratoga's final gift. Saratoga's ripple effects secured independence. French involvement exhausted Britain's will to fight. Spain's simultaneous attacks stretched British resources. The treaty recognized the United States of America. Saratoga was not just a battle, it was the spark that ignited a global war, exposed British overreach, and proved republicanism could triumph. In Part 6 finale, we'll examine its lasting legacy, how it shaped democracies, inspired revolutions, and why historians call it the most important battle of the last 1,000 years. Saratoga convinced France to formally ally with the United States in 1778. This turned a colonial revolt into a world war, pulling in Spain and the Netherlands, forced Britain to fight on multiple fronts, stretching its resources thin, proved rebellions could succeed. With foreign backing, a lesson future revolutionaries would follow. 2. Inspiration for global revolutions. The underdog victory became a blueprint for others. French Revolution, 1789. Patriots cited Saratoga as proof that oppressive monarchies could fall. Latin American Wars of Independence, 1800s. Leaders like Simón Bolívar studied Washington's tactics. Vietnam and Algeria, 20th century. Guerrilla fighters adopted the militia's hit-and-run tactics. Wherever empires ruled, Saratoga whispered, "Freedom can win." 3. Military lessons that endure. Saratoga redefined warfare. Home field advantage. Local militia's knowledge of terrain proved decisive. Asymmetric warfare. A weaker force outmaneuvered a superior army. Morale over numbers. Passionate citizen soldiers defeated demoralized professionals. 4. Why historians call it the most important battle. Secured French aid, without which Yorktown might not have happened. First major surrender of a British army to colonials, unthinkable before 1777, symbolized democracy's rise against monarchy. From the fall of the Bastille to the streets of Hanoi, Saratoga's message endured. Determined people fighting for their homes can change history. Today, its legacy lives on, not just in history books, but in every struggle for liberty.